but
good afternoon. Is everybody enjoying their lunch? I'm going to draw your attention back up here. I can do it like we do it in second grade where you clap. Yeah. People that know that one. All right. Well, welcome back. I hope everybody's enjoying their lunch, but we do have a wonderful speaker that's going to join us in just a minute. So I am up here to talk a little bit more about LISC and then introduce our speaker. So again, if you were here this morning, you know that I'm Lisa Glover and I am the CEO of LISC. And I really, once again, want to welcome everyone here for joining us for the Workforce and Small Business Seminar. And this is our keynote session. So as many of you know, and I see some former LISCers in the audience, LISC has worked for over 40 years as a nonprofit intermediary and a CDFI to forge community partnerships that connect hard to tap public and private resources with uninvested places. That's what we're all about, making that connection. And we know that this work is really particularly important in rural communities, as we discussed all day today. And through our Rural List program, led by Caitlin, we made our rural promise to achieve 20% of our community and economic development impact in rural communities. As we talked about earlier, we know that 20% of the country's population lives in those rural communities. And we want to raise those contributions from that 5 to 7% level to the 20% level. At LISC, we're taking that seriously, and it starts with us. So small businesses in particular in rural areas are the lifeblood of communities. If we want to strengthen rural communities, we have to advance a more inclusive economic development framework through equitable access to financing, to resources, to technical support for those rural businesses. And that is why LISC is so pleased to have had the opportunity to partner with the Small Business Administration over the past year as a Tier 1 grantee on the Community Navigator Pilot Program. So Community Navigators is allowing LISC to focus on building the capacity of business development organizations in the rural Delta and in 6 other markets that help support small businesses, that strengthen local networks and small business ecosystems, and invest resources in rural small business and resiliency. And LISC is very honored to be a part of this groundbreaking program. A key pillar of Rural LISC's community and economic development toolkit is the provision of high quality small business technical assistance and access to capital, as it enhances the ability of people, places, of businesses to achieve shared prosperity in our rural areas. And Rural LISC, in partnership with 51 business development organizations, supports the development of extensive coordinated assistance networks for rural enterprises that are overlooked by conventional financing challenges. So our partners, our entity, many of you are here, are entities who have demonstrated commitment to supporting small businesses, but especially those that are owned by women and owned by people of color. These partners, through participation in training and peer-to-peer network opportunities, are expanding their knowledge of SBA and other public resources, of innovative tools and other approaches. So we do know that Administrator Isabella Guzman wanted to be here today. I actually had the honor of meeting with her about a month ago, and she wanted to be here today, but I know that she had some scheduling conflicts that we just couldn't overcome. But I do have the pleasure of introducing Deidre Henry Spires, who's the senior, where are you, Deidre? There you are. There you are. Senior advisor to the administrator, and she is going to be our keynote speaker. Deidre is going to share more with us about the SBA's effort to support small businesses and their vision for rural enterprises. As a presidential appointee, she's a member of the leadership team and manages the day-to-day activities of the senior management team, operations, and policy and program implementation of the SBA, and provides confidential strategic advice to the administrator on policy programming, legislative affairs, and staff organization. Deidre has been tasked with improving and enhancing the efficiency of COVID programs from application through post-award analyses and overall program evaluation. She's also responsible for overseeing the organization's strategic and interagency efforts. In this capacity, she works on a range of critical issues, including workforce development, childcare, transportation, infrastructure, contracting, disaster recovery and resilience, and trade opportunities for U.S. small businesses. During the Biden-Harris transition, she had the honor of working on and leading as a navigator for the nomination of Dr. Cecilia Rouse to lead the Council of Community Affairs, or Council of Community, I've got community economic advisors. I had that wrong. Deidre is the former CEO of a nonprofit organization, the Dalton Daily Group, and a former professional staff member for human services and income security for Senator Max Baucus. Yeah, we're good. Okay, so she says we good. She doesn't want any more introduction, but I will tell you that I had the opportunity to meet with Deidre a month ago, and we were talking about having the administrator do this keynote address, and we found out she couldn't, and I said, I want you. And that's who we have today. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Deidre. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I am really honored to be here with LISC at this rural, are we a symposium? Are we a conference? Seminar. You look like a conference to me. You're looking pretty good to me. I wish I went to seminars that look this good. So well done. It's also an honor to be here on behalf of the 27th Administrator of the Small Business Administration, Miss Isabella Casillas Guzman. It is my pleasure to bring you greetings from her and from the entire front office team. Yeah, I needed you to stop. Lisa, I was getting tired as you read, like, I do what? What do I do? Oh my gosh, I'm exhausted. But I know you are as well. So I hope in our time together that after we've talked a bit and I've shared the work of the SBA, that you leave here feeling committed to the work that you're doing, that you leave here feeling energized to keep going, and that you leave here knowing something you didn't know before or finding a resource that can help you do the first two things, be energized and keep going. So you know already how important you are. Rural America is vitally important to the SBA. As senior advisor to the administrator, I work closely with the White House, Capitol Hill, and stakeholders to ensure the relief needed by small businesses across the country is made available and accessible. That's what I was hired to do. I was hired at a time where we were having a hard time getting dollars out the door of the SBA and into the right and appropriate hands. And we made a lot of change in the way that we balance emergency funding and security and safety for taxpayer dollars, yeah? And the right expectations that the money goes to the right place quickly. That's a lot to do, but it was our honor and privilege to do it. And I do believe you will find that we right-sized some things, we sped up some things, and we slowed down some others. But we couldn't do any of it alone. It took stakeholders like those in this room and virtually to be with us and to ensure that rural communities and businesses prospered, to help us support local economies and create high quality jobs. I am absolutely thrilled that Rural LISC has chosen workforce and small business as your conference theme. The SBA is committed to supporting America's 33 million small businesses and aspiring entrepreneurs by connecting them to affordable capital, technical assistance, and opportunities to scale. So in my experience working on COVID programs, and you know what, my glasses are new and I feel I can see you, but I still feel separated from you. I have to take them off for a second until I get used to them, and it's like they're not there. But we learned a couple of things. We learned about 4 really important things. We learned about the importance of the access to capital. During COVID, right after COVID, people needed capital, they needed it quickly, and they needed it to sustain operations. And there's awareness around the country now about capital. Small business owners who were doing it, off your credit card. Come on, if I'm talking to anybody in the room, you can give, I need a little love back. You're eating your lunch, it smells kind of good too. So you know about financing through your credit card, you know about the struggles of small businesses. And we realized that there needed to be access to capital and different kinds of capital. We all learned about the importance of technology. That's what kept us connected. That's what kept us together. Some of you are using it now to be in this room with us today. And we realized that we can use it all the more as a training, as a workforce tool. And so that's a lesson that we've learned and we've kept. We also learned about the value of exporting. because some of us became accidental exporters. That I have to give that one to our administrator. She coined that phrase because of all the people who were starting to sell in the digital marketplace because they couldn't do it hand to hand. And all of a sudden, they realized their products on certain platforms were going across the world. And now all of a sudden, you're this thing called an exporter, and people who never knew about your product or your services know about them now. And then lastly, and the one that's nearest and dearest to my heart, we started thinking about, okay, wait, we want to return to normalcy. There is something nice about working in your jacket from here to here and your pajamas and slippers from here to there. It's really nice, but there's something about walking and getting your coffee and running into a coworker, a colleague, sometimes just another human being. I hate to take you back to COVID, but remember when you see another human being and be like, hi, we didn't know how to act anymore. We were so excited to see each other, and that's really important. So then what do we need to support workers getting back to the workforce? And childcare is number one. Okay, I may be in the right place. I may just be in the right room. Childcare is everything, and we're realizing that some of us, though, and I'll see if I'm really in the right room, some of us already knew that. So everyone else has caught up with us, and they're realizing that childcare is not only a work support, but that we also need high quality childcare because we're developing the workforce of tomorrow. And so we need our children to get strong starts and to be able to thrive. So how do we do this work? One of the programs that SBA uses to get this work done is our Community Navigator program, of which LISC is a tier 1, that's the top tier, y'all, tier 1 navigator. They are partnering, you are partnering with the SBA and with 30 community-based organizations across 7 markets to build and strengthen networks to support the entrepreneurs in urban and rural communities, including several rural Delta business development organizations. I think here today, okay, if you're not in the room, I am about to call out at least 2. I hope they're here. Kentucky Highlands Investment Corporation. There we go. Aren't you glad you hadn't gone to the bathroom or anything? And Iberia Development Foundation. See, they got up for a second. Somebody represent for Iberia. Very good. But Iberia held a seminar on business financing, access to capital, and raising credit scores. The foundation also provided counseling sessions with clients on disaster preparedness, recovery, and resilience, and assisted clients with setting up their financials. What our friends at Kentucky Highlands Investment Corp, KHIC, provided more than 100 businesses with virtual training sessions designed to help with digital marketing, social media, and e-commerce topics. To help businesses grow their digital presence, I was just talking about that, and impact. In addition, KHIC worked directly with businesses who requested funds, primarily through the microloan program and the SOAR Farm Loan Program. Let's give them a round of applause for just being exemplars of what we're trying to accomplish. And I know there are more stories in this room. One of the things that we've been trying to achieve across the Biden-Harris administration is building equity. And I want to just take a second to say, okay, in real terms, what is equity? I know, equity leans into that statement that a rising tide lifts all boats. But equity asks, is the water already over your head? Equity asks, is a rising tide only going to drown you? Equity builds lock systems that lifts everyone to the level of the tide so that what? Say it with me, a rising tide can lift all boats. And I like that, woo, come on, I like that. And so that's what we're trying to do. And rural America knows what it feels like to be left behind and or left out of the conversation. Biden-Harris, the SBA is committed to making that not the reality anymore. But instead, you finding people that are coming where you are, willing to meet you where you are, and have conversations that are led by you as you tell us what you need in your community to make it function in a way that it can take advantage of these opportunities. Does that make sense? Okay. So with this equity mindset, we've looked at capital access and we've looked at funding, how we do our funding, and we funded 114 billion to small businesses across underserved demographic groups, including rural Americans, Black and African Americans, Hispanics and Latinos, Native Americans, Asian Americans, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders. We've prioritized the smallest of the small businesses. I'm going to say that again. We've prioritized, because that means no matter what hue your skin, no matter what else is happening in your origin story, we have prioritized the smallest of the smallest. That means mom and pop businesses, that means smaller firms. 96% of PPP loans went to firms of 20 employees or less. Let's just take that in for a minute. Because we hear about the bad actors from the beginning of the program when you had an administration that was on its way out, and so maybe didn't put the checks and balances that should have been there in place. And one that came in and then had to make these fixes in order to make sure that the taxpayers' dollars were protected. However, the real story of PPP is that most of that money, 96%, that's mind-boggling, went to firms of 20 people or less. Amazing. In another program that we've run called the Shuttered Venues and Operators Grant, SVOG, 90% again went to firms that have fewer than 50 employees, and I can really put a finer point on that. Most of them had 5 or less employees. Yeah, so we're looking in every sector from entertainment to service provision on the smallest of the small. We distributed 18 billion in restaurant relief funds. 7.5 billion of that went to women-owned restaurants or restaurateurs. Low-income communities, over 600,000 small businesses received a lifeline of up to 15,000 in relief grants from COVID EIDL. We dug deep in our building. We moved the EIDL program when it looked like that's what it would take to get money to you faster and more efficiently. I remember the day when we had a backlog of 650,000 tax forms sitting at the IRS. Those were harrowing days, sleepless nights across the agency, because you had real people. And I just want to let you know who's working on your behalf. People just like you, just like look at the person across from you, just like you were processing these loans and grants frantically because they knew they were just like you and they didn't want their businesses and your businesses to fail. And we had this backlog that we would have never, ever been able to close because we were getting back 5,000 tax forms at a time. We were never going to get there. The government came together and our friends at the IRS Our friends in the Office of Capital Access at the SBA in the One SBA approach, and fashioned a solution that helped us in record time work down that backlog and process every single idle loan. Yeah. And then we're opening doors through new reforms. We're looking at our own programs to figure out how they can better serve you. I feel like I've been up here for a while, so let me just hone in on something that I really care deeply about, and then we'll talk about my friends over at the Office of Entrepreneurial Development in the SBA. We're one agency, but we have so many parts that do different things to lift up our mission. What they do is really make sure that there's an access to information, that they improve access to business counseling, training, and services. They partner with small business centers, small business development centers, minority serving institutions to make sure that every time you turn around, you can find some help from the SBA. What we realized is that while we were doing all this work, people didn't know we were doing it. And that's why the Biden-Harris team funded the Community Navigators Program. 51 hubs, 8 tier 1 hubs, of which LISC is one, yes, that really then work through a system of spokes to make sure that communities are connected to resources. In other words, if you need something, ask Lisa, call Caitlin. And they'll get you covered. I want to lean into the work that we're doing on childcare for a minute, and just focus there for a second. Shortly after coming on, one of the things the administrator said is, Deirdre, I want to do something on childcare as a work support, because she was getting asked so many questions that she was like, wait a minute, isn't that more appropriate for the labor department? Like, I'm being asked about workforce when that's really her colleagues' area. But this is an administration that's like, we're one government. If there's a question or a problem to solve, it's everyone's question to answer and everyone's problem to solve. And we lean into what can we do? So I'm going to share with you thoughts. You're getting it hot off the press. These are not fully developed. So now's a good time to call Lisa, Caitlin, Matt, others, and tell us what you think so we get your feedback. But what we're working on is looking at ways in which we can improve your ability in the childcare sector to open businesses and support them. And I say it that way because childcare is a mission. It's a ministry, dare I say. It's a service, it's a heart thing. And very few childcare providers think of themselves as business owners. Well, COVID changed that, because you know you're in business when you can't pay employees. And so we want to, with an understanding of the service, ministry, love place that childcare comes from, to still be able to help you on the business aspects. And so what we're proposing to do is take one of our old guides that was out, I think, in the Clinton era, and update it, bring it into this century on how to start a childcare business. Have you ever been halfway through a thing and realized you never knew how to start it? It was just grace, you just did it. A lot of our childcare businesses are formed that way, but would you like to know, like in the best world, what are the steps? So in that way, you can sometimes go back and do a couple that you maybe didn't get that could help you right now. So our friends at OED, poor Preston, everyone, this is Preston Hart. He's come with me. He works in our Office of Entrepreneurial Development, and Preston has been invaluable in pushing this work forward. Can we give him a round of applause? And we've worked with OED, our Office of Women's Business Ownership, our Office of Capital Access, our Office of Government Contracting, and Business Development and our Office of Veterans Affairs, just to name a few, to think about what can we bring to this space, who's got something to offer. And everybody brought something to the table. So first, what if we update that guide, make it online, and maybe partner with our friends at HHS and at Education to make it robust? And we're in those conversations now. So I'm excited about that. So that's cross-agency, talking about how to bring you a guide that's actually usable and that actually links you in some form or fashion to the zoning and licensing in localities that the federal government couldn't possibly be a warehouse for, but maybe we can connect you in the right places if we work together. We've also talked about how do we provide some access to capital to our childcare entrepreneurs? Is there a way that we can think of some sort of product or partner with states in a way, and this is still nascent, to get you the access to capital to meet licensing needs? It's expensive to get licensing, to maybe help you meet your training needs. And so there's some ideas that we have percolating on how we can augment or work with what HHS provides or state governments provide with capital for licensing and training. The other thing in these conversations, things happen when people talk one to another. HHS brought to us, what about in disaster? Fiona, Ian, others have just made us realize that childcare and disaster, so you've lost everything, you're home, you're trying to pull it back together. Okay, where do you leave the kids so you can do what you need to do in this moment? Wait a minute, the childcare center down the street was in the same hurricane and had the same flooding you had. And so currently in joint joint field operations, you've got SBA and HHS. I'm thrilled about this because literally hot off the press, I got an email this morning talking about SBA in coordination with FEMA and HHS at Joint Field Office doing a crosswalk of child-centered data and having FEMA maintain the database and using it to cross-reference application data to figure out what childcare facilities are asking and needing SBA loans. That's the government working together. I'm really proud of that. I need some applause on that. I think I'm not sure where I am on time. Okay. One of the things I just want to leave you with is this. There's a lot happening in our society, in our country, across the world. There are a lot of conversations that are difficult, some just downright even unpleasant. Workers are in every hand discouraged and tired. Children need support. So I want to just ask you to do something. I want you to understand the importance of the work your organization, and I mean LISC, but every organization in the room is doing. And I want you to keep doing it. It is impossible to create a change moment. It's impossible to move forward unless you first stand fast. So right where you're feeling weak and wobbly and like, does it really matter? And who am I impacting? I want today you to hear someone say, stop. It does matter. You are impacting people. You are changing lives, and it is necessary what you're doing. So just stand fast. And then I want you to look around and say, now, what do I need to move forward? And I want you to put your zip code into the SBA finder on sba.gov. And I want you to find out what's around you. Your community navigator, your small business development center, your SCORE chapter, your WBC, Women's Business Center. Any more you want me? Okay. All your office of veterans, business centers. I want you to find out what's around you. And then I want you to call them and I want you to ask for help. Even if you don't know what you need, just ask and say, look, this is where I am. And somebody will be responsive. And then if they're not, tell them Deirdre said to call you and tell you, but you've got lists here to help you navigate this system. So you have help, you have translation, you have access. I want you to realize that if you're in this room or watching this, you have access. It used to be, remember, people paid big time lobbyists to get what? Access. But you're here and you've got it. Lisk is bringing us to you. You didn't have to pick up your stuff and walk across town and sit in our conference room. They did all that for you a month ago. And they're bringing us to you to be a service to you. I hope that you're encouraged today. I hope that you've heard something of value. And I'm going to stick around and answer some questions. I've enjoyed being here. Thank you so much for having me. And I'll stick around for questions, and I'll stick around a little after so we can chat a bit. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Deidre. I know we have a few minutes for questions, but to really kind of kick off the questions, I just want to come back to a point you had raised earlier, which is
I'm going to put my glasses on, Caitlin, so
you can see me.
you.
All right.
Right, the red is helping. Thank you. Okay,
The
here we
beacon.
go.
We talked a lot about childcare. And I know childcare is so important to many, many of the organizations in this room. We know that women are own about 96% of the childcare
Yes.
facilities across the country, 50% of which are BIPOC owned. This is a huge issue in rural communities in particular.
Yes.
And so my question to you, and I know there are a lot of resources at SBA, there's a lot of interagency coordination happening right now, but how best can rural communities and remote areas and our indigenous communities in particular to really lean in and work with SBA to, one, elevate the need for rural childcare facilities, and then also to immediately connect with some of these resources?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So one of the things, it's in my bio, but not really. So I worked on the Senate Finance Committee. But at the time that I worked there, it was chaired by a gentleman named Max Baucus, Chairman Max Baucus, Senator Max Baucus. Max Baucus is from the great state of Montana. I spent 8 years going back and forth to Montana. And when folks would look like, you're in Montana, I'd be like, yeah, I'm from a ranch back east. And they go, what's it called? And I go, Brooklyn. And, but I get rural and I get rural frontier even. And I get one child in a school district because every child in America is entitled to a free public education. I get what it looks like and I get the issues. And so I'm going to ask you to lean on your our offices of our women's business centers, our WBCs. OBO and its leadership went through a lot to ensure that in this administration, we built out those women's business centers so that there's at least one in every state and territory. And so they are folks that can answer questions. The other thing that's happening is OED is working with OBO. I'm sorry, I'm saying all this alphabet soup. The Office of Entrepreneurial Development at SBA is working with our Office on Women's Business Opportunities to really center the work that's happening around the country on childcare. Some of these centers are doing phenomenal things and have a really tight infrastructure. And we're now in the process of making sure that there's shared learning. We've had these webinars run by some of our WBCs, our women's business centers in Connecticut, who are doing like amazing things and looking at how can we replicate, what can we do? One of the things for sure is our Office of Native American Affairs is also wrapped in. I see acronyms ONAA and I'm like, wait a minute, how do I say it? ONA is also part of this conversation. So you're at the right time, Caitlin, where we are building this infrastructure of sharing, that when you get to that state WBC, even if they're far away from you, they will be able to access people who can actually help you. Okay. And we have more navigators. We have 51 of them than LISC. LISC is your first way in, but even the navigators are partnering now with one another. LISC has a rural specialty, but there are navigators all over this country and even in some of the states where you are that aren't LISC that they can connect with. We are weaving something that looks like this across the country. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Julianne. I work for Rural LISC and I'm representing the virtual community.
Thank you.
I will say while you were speaking, the screen looked a little bit like confetti because there's a lot of reactions going on. People have the emojis, which we don't have in real life, which is a shame. But here's a question that they asked online. I believe you said 96% of PPP funds went to businesses with 20 or fewer employees.
Yeah.
Has there been any research or analysis done on the impact of those funds for small business sustainability? If so, is this research informing future SBA programming?
Come on. Thank you, virtual community, for the emojis. I send them right back to you. I appreciate you and I appreciate that question. We have a lot to learn from everything that we went through. And yes, we are internally doing a lot of research. We're actually engaging outside researchers as well to help us evaluate and collate the lessons learned so that we stay ever ready. When you've been through something, one disaster, what you know is it may not be the same thing, but something will happen again. And how do we not start from ground zero? We should be starting from a baseline of knowledge. So not only do we have to know how that money got leveraged by small businesses, but we also have to know what did we do? What were all the improvements that we made through trial and error? Like what worked and how do we do that first? And that means for every, into the eons of this country, administrations even after us, there's learning that should be built on. One thing I do want to say that's particular to the navigators and answering that question is OED has done a really great job at, even in evaluation, asking for disaggregated data. It's really hard to know what's happening if you don't know who it happened to and where they were. And so they have updated their evaluation tool and it's all voluntary. We don't require anybody to tell us anything about themselves. And they're having excellent results on voluntary reporting of this is who I am. This is who my business is. And that helps us understand what we've done all the more. So thank you for the question.
Hi, Deidre.
Hi.
This is not a question, but I can't make emojis happen in real life. But I did want to get up and say thank you. My name's Celissa Singali. I'm the president of Northern Initiatives, a CDFI that supports small businesses throughout the state of Michigan. And I just want to say thank you on behalf of all of the small businesses that we work with, as well as the small businesses represented by others in the room who were the recipients of those PPP loans. We know it kept them in business, who were the recipients of the microloan support, who are the recipients of EIDL and all those other programs. It's made a tremendous difference. So you thanked all of us, but thank you.
Oh my. That is so special. Thank you so much. You are a walking emoji. Thank you. That was just everything wonderful. Yeah, the CDFI community, huge shout out to you. You stood up and showed out in PPP. Thank you. Particularly on that second wave where we were like, how do we reach rural communities of color and other parts of our country that felt like they were being left behind? You really stood up and showed out. We can talk for days about CDFIs. We've got new products. We've expanded Community Advantage to make you able to lend even more into communities. List that you are CDFI, like that is what has me all in for you. So there's so much more to say. I hope one day you'll have me back and we can talk about the rest. Thank you.
Deidre, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. All right. Following that amazing, amazing conversation, next up, we're going to be talking policy. So state and federal policy. So here to join us, Matt Joseph and Michelle Haradi, who are members of our national policy team.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Now that's a tough act to follow, am I right? Not bad at all, Deidre. Thank you so much for your comments. And if I can quickly talking about PPP and you know, and you can help me with the stats, but I also feel like LISC, we helped you know, produce over $50 million worth of lending in the PPP program, and I feel like 80%, north of 80% were to BIPOC owners, business owners, and I saw some of those loans were as small as less than $10,000. So we really were trying to hit the areas that we're really not getting well served. So we're proud of our work in that space as well. So today we're gonna do a little policy update for about the next 45 minutes or so. Michelle Haradi from the policy team is joining me as well. And we'll try to hit some of the key issues and leave a few minutes for some questions if we can. Perfect. All right, so the things I think we're going to cover, we'll talk a little about the midterm elections we just had. Talk a little about what's left this year, the 117th Congress, the one that's going to be wrapping up. We'll see what's left on their agenda for the next few weeks. Talk a little about some of our policy priorities going forward. We want to talk a little about a lot of the legislative accomplishments of the last couple of years that people kind of forgot about, that there's actually quite a bit done in that the administration is now implementing some of these landmark laws. So we want to talk about that. And then we'll look forward a little, what's going to be going on in the next session of Congress. Where should I be pointing this to? There we go. Okay. So, and this is relatively hot off the presses. You don't normally say that in December, that you're just announcing some relatively new news on election outcomes. But we finally know the control of the Senate is definitively going to be in the Democrats' hands with the 51-49 majority, courtesy of Senator Warnock's victory the other night. That actually does mean a lot. You know, you might say to yourself, well, it doesn't, you know, they already had control because they had the tie-breaking vote of Kamala Harris. But honestly, like in the weeds, because now the Democrats can have majorities on every committee, so you don't get these deadlocked votes coming out of committee. That actually frees up a lot more floor time because of the rules. It can get things to the floor quicker and can get nominees passed quicker than if you just had a 50-50. So that's going to be a big item. And honestly, that was hugely important because there's going to be a very busy legislative session over the next few weeks. And I think had the election turned out differently for the Senate, if the Democrats had lost the Senate, they probably would have had to use a lot of floor time trying to get some nominees for judgeships over the finish line. But now they can breathe a little, take care of that next year if they want. So that's what we're looking at on the Senate side. On the House side, we have a couple races still yet to be officially called in the House, but it looks like at the end of the day, it's probably going to be a 222 seat majority for the Republicans, pretty thin majority, and then 213 for the Democrats. That's, you know, almost a kind of a mirror of what the Democrats had to deal with in the last session of Congress. It's going to be very interesting to see if Kevin McCarthy will be elected the Speaker. We'll get a little more on that later, but yeah, it's a pretty tight margin to have to control. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And in the state offices, the Democrats did pick up a couple of governorships. Nothing too shocking. They were in traditionally blue states, Maryland and Massachusetts, that happen to have Republican governors. So those seats were flipped back. So it's pretty much, you know, wherever you look now, right? It's even in the Senate. It's even in the House. It's even in the governor's state houses as well at this point. It's a very split country we're in right now. So what do the elections mean for the leadership? Well, we already know that on the Democrat side, they have elected Hakeem Jeffries to replace Nancy Pelosi as the majority leader of the Democratic Party. What we still don't know and may not know for a few more weeks, if Kevin McCarthy can secure his role as the Speaker of the House. I mean, you all probably see the news as much as I do, and it's a real guessing game. It's gonna be a real parlor game. If he can pull off the votes he needs, there's a lot of people making noise. They might not vote for him. They can also kind of withhold their vote and just kind of vote present. There are ways they can probably voice concern without kind of torpedoing his chances. So we'll see if they can they rally together. It's been a long time since this has actually gone to multiple votes. Usually parties get behind themselves ahead of coming to the floor for the votes. So we will see what happens with that. The Senate, there won't be any change. Senator Schumer will continue to be majority leader, and Mitch McConnell will be the minority leader. And some of the key committees, we are going to see some new leadership on the Appropriations Committee. Senator Patty Murray is going to be stepping in. Senator Leahy retired. And on the Republican side, Senator Shelby retired. So we have Senator Susan Collins from Maine, who's going to be taking over that slide. The House side, the leadership will still be the same. They'll obviously just be the chairman will now be on the Republican side, Kay Granger, and Rosa DeLauro will be the ranking. The Senate side, we did see a retire, and I'm just kind of focusing on some of the key committees for our work. Obviously, the Appropriations Committee funds all the government programs and agencies. The Finance Committee is the one that writes all the tax laws. So for things like low-income housing tax credits, new market tax credits, they have the jurisdiction. On the Senate side, no changes. Wyden will be continue being chair. Senator Crapo from Idaho will be the ranking member. On the House side, there was a retirement. Kevin Brady retired as the ranking member on the Ways and Means Committee. So the Republicans will need to elect a new member. Some of the names that are being considered, it's Vern Buchanan from Florida, Adrian Smith from Nebraska, Jason Smith from Missouri. Jason Smith, by the way, a big supporter of new market tax credits. So that could be exciting if he gets that position. And then Richie Neal, who was formerly the chairman of the committee, will now be the ranking member. The other, another big committee of interest, the Banking Committee, overseeing all the HUD programs. For example, CDFIs, they come under their jurisdiction. Senator Sherrod Brown will continue to be the chairman of that committee. Senator Scott will be the new ranking member, taking over for Pat Toomey from Virginia, from Pennsylvania. And then on the House side, same two leaders, just in flip roles now. McHenry will now be the chair of the Financial Services Committee. Maxine Waters, the ranking member. Lastly, Senate Health, the Education, Labor, Pensions Committee, do all the workforce programs, health and education, obviously. Bernie Sanders will probably replace Patty Murray. It's not clear if the Republicans, whether that might be Rand Paul or Bill Cassidy from Louisiana. On the House side, Bobby Scott will continue to be the leader on the Democrat side. Not clear. Virginia Fox has been leading the Republicans. She could be the chair, but she would need an agreement from her caucus to serve an extra term in that role. Otherwise, Joe Wilson is the next in line. All right, so let's turn to the. This is I'm still going, right? Okay. I got to take my orders. Make sure I'm right. We'll turn then to the what's left of the 117th Congress. This is the Congress we're finishing up now. They're going to be working for the next few weeks in what we call a lame duck session, which is the session that occurs after elections have already happened. The most important thing is they have to get federal funding bills done. The federal fiscal year starts on October 1. So the 2023 year has already started, but they haven't yet passed the budgets for 2023. So what they do is they have a continuing resolution. Late September, they enacted a continuing resolution that keeps all the agencies funded at last year's levels until they pass their budgets. And they gave themselves till December 16th to do this. Guess what? They're probably not going to meet that deadline either. They're probably going to need another either short-term hopefully a short-term continuing resolution, maybe up till like Christmas, to get these over the finish line. But I think they're moving in that direction. I think there's a lot of interest on both parties to just get this stuff done, not have a carryover to the next session of Congress. That may have been a different opinion if the Republicans had a much better showing, where they'd flipped the Senate or gotten a lot more House seats. Maybe they'd be more energized to try to use that leverage next year. But since that wasn't the case, I think everyone would like to just get this done. And some of the key programs we've been tracking, the Section 4 capacity building program. These are just some of the numbers that we're looking at. You see the House and Senate marks. The House are probably a little more ambitious. They weren't really working within any caps that have been approved. The Senate also, they didn't know what their caps were, but they tend to, because you have to get 60 votes in the Senate. they tend to be a little more realistic about what they can get across the finish line. So typically the numbers in the Senate end up being a little lower. Hopefully what we'll see when the final bill is done is numbers somewhere in between here, maybe a little closer to the Senate side. But some fairly good outcomes I think we'll see. RCDI, I should point out, a very small program at USDA for rural community development for technical assistance training, has been such a small budget of $6 million. We actually hope to get a little bit of an increase this year for that program. All right, there's also a possibility of maybe some tax provisions getting across the finish line. There's often at the end of a year, there's tax provisions that expired, and they call them extenders. So frequently, and there's maybe about 24 of these, and frequently what they'll do is just package them all together and just try to extend them another year or two. So that's an opportunity, but there's also, as long as there's any kind of tax bill moving, there's also an opportunity maybe to get some other things added onto that as well. So I'd say the top priorities for LISC has been the low income housing tax credit. There was legislation, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, that's been introduced, has about 24 changes to the program that would really make it more effective and efficient, and be able to increase production under the program. So there's a couple provisions we're hoping in particular get across the finish line. One is an extender. The formula allocation for the 9% credits had been increased by 12.5%. So every state was getting 12.5% more credits than they otherwise would have since 2018, but that's now expired. So we wanted to make sure we get that floor back up to where it used to be last year. And then there's a provision on private activity bonds when you're using the credits with the bonds to make that much more efficient and produce a lot more units. So those are the two big things we're pushing for. New market tax credits, we want to make those permanent. Those are set to expire in 2025. So it's weird. On the one hand, Congress looks at it and says, well, it doesn't expire until 2025. We don't need to worry about that now. But on the other hand, it's actually very cheap if you want to make it permanent, because the revenues are already kind of baked in. How they score it is actually very cheap. It would cost about $1.8 billion to make it permanent now. If you wait till it expires, it's going to be about $9 billion. So it's actually very cheap to do it. And lastly, Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. I've talked about this in front of you all before. This would create a new tax credit for single family homes in distressed neighborhoods. And I'll tell you, that's as important in shrinking cities like a Detroit or a Cleveland or a Baltimore, Philadelphia, as it is in rural communities where the cost of developing the homes really price it out. It's just not, it doesn't pencil out. So this credit would cover that gap between your total development costs and what you end up selling the home for. So it can really bring some of these homes to market, really an economic development tool as much as a housing tool. Real quickly, policy priorities. We always like to remind folks, we put out a huge slew of these. They're on our website for looking at the 2021, 2022 legislative year. Well, now that we're kind of looking into ahead to a new Congress, we're going to refresh the document. So we hope to have a new version of these up for that'll cover the next couple of years, probably in January, February. So please do keep an eye out for that. And with that, Michelle, I am going to turn it over to you, right? As we talk more about the implementation of some of the legislation.
Well, let me lower this, much shorter than Matt. Okay. Well, thanks again, Matt. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Harati, and I'm a Senior Policy Officer with LISC National Policy Team. And it's a pleasure to be here with you all today. So as you may be aware, and as Matt was just sharing, there's been quite a lot of activity, congressional activity since the passage of the CARES Act. And so we wanted to provide you all with a bit more background on each of these landmark laws, and then focus in on some of the key workforce and small business provisions within each, really going from the American Rescue Plan Act to the Inflation Reduction Act most recently. Let's see, there we go. So ARPA, or as the American Rescue Plan Act is otherwise known, was signed into law in March 2021 and provided $1.9 trillion into support to the nation to really spur economic recovery in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. A key piece of this legislation was the supply of $350 billion in the form of state and local fiscal recovery funds, really to support local units of government across the country in responding to the pandemic and addressing economic needs. The key priority for these funds and eligible use is to support the delivery of financial and technical assistance to small businesses, and also employment training programs and funding for the wraparound services that we know are so critical. There was also significant tax changes and financial support directly for families. This included the expansion of the earned income tax credit, the child tax credit, and then also the additional direct payments to individuals. And then, as we just heard, there was also a tremendous amount of support for SBA really to direct engagement and delivery of financial assistance to small business owners themselves, whether that was through the EIDL grant program, restaurant revitalization fund, and then also the shuttered venues operators grants, amongst many others that they had the privilege of administering. And then, as we also heard, ARPA provided SBA with $100 million really to launch a community navigators pilot program that's an innovative approach to really building more equitable entrepreneurial ecosystems and increasing access to SBA resources within historically underserved populations. It leverages the hub and spoke model that really allows hub organizations to serve as the backbone to the smaller community-based organizations that are on the front lines, providing technical and financial assistance to small businesses in a way that's culturally competent and linguistically accessible. And then in October of 2021, SBA actually announced 51 grantees that they're leveraging through a tiered funding approach that's supporting at the national, regional, and local level to really scale the work and impact of SBA's resources. And LISC and Rural LISC were fortunate enough to be awarded as a Tier 1 grantee and are carrying out that work with several partners in the room and in the virtual room, particularly in the rural Delta region. And then, as you may be aware, EDA was also awarded a tremendous amount of funding through ARPA, $3 billion that they used to spur economic recovery in a number of ways. A few of those that are tied into workforce and economic development include the Build Back Regional Challenge, which is a $1 billion investment that's intended to spur economic recovery, really through the focus of generating new regional clusters and supporting the scaling of existing ones. There's also the Good Jobs Challenge, which was a $500 million investment to support workforce training in a collaborative way. And then the Economic Adjustment Act received a $500 million as well, the EAA program, to really support EDA's longstanding work and long-term recovery in communities. You may have heard they also just recently announced a new capacity building program called the Economic Recovery Corps, which is really focused on building out capacity in rural communities to support access to federal funding. And then last but not least, ARPA reauthorized and provided $10 billion for the State Small Business Credit Initiative, which is being administered by Treasury in conjunction with the states, really with the aim of supporting a multitude of small business financing programs. And all the eligible units of government have applied for the program, which will really be helpful to close some of those long-standing access to capital gaps, and also supporting venture capital, equity investments, particularly looking at serving socially and economically disadvantaged businesses. And Treasury's been reviewing those applications on an ongoing basis, and more than half of those have already been approved. So then next, we had the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, otherwise known as IJA, which was signed into law in November of 21. It's a $1.2 trillion investment in the country's infrastructure and directs about $550 billion in new funding, the vast majority of which is going towards supporting the modernization of America's physical infrastructure. So looking at investments in roads, bridges, railways, and also broadband. Lesser known is that IJA also importantly codified the Minority Business Development Agency, or MBDA, and also provided support and elevation of the agency. So this is a new political appointment was created, the Undersecretary of Commerce for Minority Business Development, who will actually be here joining us tomorrow. It also doubled the authorization for MBDA really to be able to scale the reach of its work, and particularly looking into how can they make sure that minority businesses in rural communities have access to MBDA resources. And that's through the provision of new initiatives, such as the minority business development grants to support nonprofits directly and to partner with MBDA, increasing the ability of access to capital programs, and then also setting up a new rural business centers program that would support MBDA in partnering with HBCUs and other MSIs. One of the big components of the infrastructure law was also the broadband components. As you can see here, there was a tremendous amount spread across multiple projects or programs, about $65 billion in total, and just wanted to dive into a few of them a bit further. There's it's my phone's ringing, so sorry, Matt. It's not important. This is, feel free to ignore that I put on Do Not Disturb. So with that, yes, so for about just over $42 billion went to the NTIA to implement the BEAD block grant program, really to support the deployment of infrastructure of broadband. We know that one of the key areas that they're looking at in terms of deploying these dollars is also how can they strengthen small business communities and making sure that main streets and commercial corridors have the high-speed broadband that they need really to draw in investments. There's also the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is a new longer-term income subsidy to support low-income households in affording high-speed internet. And then to go with that, really for the first time, investments in digital equity at the state and national level, and making sure that communities have access to the resources they need to really support digital skilling and upskilling. And then the USDA Reconnect program and the Tribal Connectivity Program also received $2 billion each. And then last but not least, or no, sorry, one more. Getting ahead of myself. The CHIPS and Science Act. It was signed into law in August of this year, and it provides about $280 billion in investments that are really aimed at strengthening American manufacturing, supply chains, and workforce development efforts. There's two particular components of this that we wanted to call your attention to. There's two new authorizations for the EDA. The first of which is the Regional Technology and Innovation Hub Program, which is an authorization for $10 billion to bring together regional partnerships to really focus in on how we can create more sustainable manufacturing sectors in communities they're not currently in. And then also the Recompete Pilot Program has a $1 billion authorization, which is focused on alleviating economic distress and supporting long-term comprehensive economic development within persistent poverty communities. And then closely following the CHIPS Act was the Inflation Reduction Act, which was also signed into law in August. The Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA as it's otherwise known, it's a $700 billion sweeping climate tax and healthcare package. You may recall the Build Back Better Act. This is the smaller, trimmed down version of that. Unfortunately, it didn't include many of the proposed investments in childcare or housing. In childcare or other social infrastructure, but there were some key affordable housing and community development provisions that were included, including safeguarding low-income housing tax credit, creating an energy and water retrofit program, supporting funding of a new greenhouse gas reduction program at EPA, and then also creating environmental and justice block grants and equity programs. So with that background on what's already been enacting, I'm going to pass it back to Matt, who's going to share a little bit more on our priorities looking forward.
Thanks, Michelle. And I want to say, I'm going to move back for a second. Don't sleep on that greenhouse gas reduction fund. That is huge. It's $27 billion targeting projects that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And these can be, manufacturing facilities doing solar panels, or it could be, TOD kind of investments. And the EPA is right now trying to figure out how they're going to administer this. The law actually gave them 6 months to get the money out the door, $27 billion. I think that's going to be a tough deadline to meet. They put out a request for comments that was due last week. A lot of CDFIs are really interested in seeing how they can make this program work. It's unlikely that it's going to be like a typical like CDFI fund initiative where you could have hundreds and hundreds of CDFIs come in and ask for money, just because of the scale of this and how quickly they have to get the money out. But definitely that's a space to watch where if people are forming partnerships and you want to get engaged in that as secondary recipients, I think there's a great opportunity there. All right, so looking forward, what are we going to be looking to do in next Congress in the next year or two? Well, obviously, we're going to continue to in FY 2024. The one thing Congress has to do, they never do it on time, but they do have to pass their appropriations bills. So even with a divided White House and House of Representatives now, I think you can expect that they will pass some form of appropriations. So a lot of it might be more on the defense. It might be a little less ambitious than the Biden administration has been able to achieve in the last couple of years. But we'll be fighting for the key appropriations programs like the ones we highlighted earlier. Whatever we cannot get across the finish line on the tax side, we will pick up again next year, whether that's the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act for the LIHTC, the new market tax credits permanency, or this new Neighborhood Homes Investment Act we were talking about. Those will be front and center for our tax work. There's certain agencies, the Economic Development Administration, they're supposed to be reauthorized typically every 5 years or so, but EDA hasn't been reauthorized since 2004. We thought there was a chance something was going to get done this year. It wasn't. So we'll keep an eye next year to see if there's some kind of bipartisan movement to reauthorize the program. Again, you don't have to be reauthorized as long as the appropriators still give you money to run your programs. You can still do that. But the longer you go from your authorization, kind of the more outdated the programs get. So we want to really focus on with EDA, their technical assistance and capacity building initiatives, reducing a rural match, I think is something we really like to see, and more of their disaster recovery resiliency work, kind of really make that more of a focus and with some new authorizations. There's also some legislation that we've been really pushing with Main Street America. It's called the Revitalizing Small and Local Businesses Act. And what this would do is get money. It really supports the BDO network we've been talking about, the business development organizations who are working there on the ground in these communities, whether it's rural main streets or in urban corridors where they might be just working in a block or two. Well, these organizations, they really need the capacity building support, like a lot of you all get through the Section 4 program at HUD to support your housing and community development. They really need support for staff, for operations, for TA and training. And so we think Department of Commerce should own a program like that, really, and to meet their goals around community equity, because the BDOs are working with the smaller left behind businesses. And I gotta say, EDA doesn't do the best job of reaching those targets. They're great for the broader economic development work, but to really get to the boots on the ground, I think they should be administering a national program. So we're hoping we're going to continue to push that as a legislative vehicle for next year. The Farm Bill has got to be passed, is up for reauthorization for next year. That actually was authorized 5 years ago, so it expires in 2023. There usually is bipartisan support around the Farm Bill. I mean, a lot of it is around these big nutrition programs, crop insurance, commodities, et cetera. But there is the titles for rural development in the bill, so that's something we're really going to keep an eye on too. Lastly, WIOA. It needs to be reauthorized as well. This could be a year. The House almost got something. Well, the House did get something across the finish line a few months ago. It kind of stalled out in the Senate. It did have some bipartisan support. There was a handful of Republicans, so maybe there could be an opportunity for engagement around WIOA. And again, it's increasingly there's programs at WIOA that do target rural communities, and we want to make sure those are authorized to the highest funding levels possible. Lastly, I would say, people ask, well, what can we do? What more can we do on the advocacy and engagement? It's really just critical that you keep in touch with your members of Congress on these issues, that you're taking them on site visits, tours, ribbon cuttings, groundbreakings, things like that in your communities. If the member is not available, take the district staff person out, really show them around. So I'd really just encourage that kind of like retail work with your members' offices. We can be a resource on the LISC policy team. Michelle and I's contact information is there. Check out our website. If you're ever in town and you want to go see a member, but you don't kind of know what to do, what are your first steps? Give us a call. We'll help you. We can help you set up the meetings. So we want to play that role for you guys. So that's what I would definitely encourage you to do and do it early and often. So with that, I think we're open for some questions. We still have some time, Kate? Yeah, oh, yeah. Thanks. Now start with an emoji, please.
There's a heart on it. Does
Oh, a
that help?
heart. That must be pretty.
I have a quick question and then a longer question from the virtual community. The Appropriations Committee is chaired and vice chaired by women, exclamation point. Would that be a first?
Huh.
I'm
That's a
sorry.
great question.
It said started, I forgot to say, wow, first. Just you think so?
I don't know. What do you think, Mark? Probably.
Feels right. It feels
Feels
right that
right.
it's the first time. We'll find out, right?
Okay.
We'll find out and promote it. That sounds cool. The second question that might require a little bit more answer is, has the policy team identified our rural champions, congressional members that have been particularly vocal and visible on supporting and standing up for rural and economic development discussions?
So we actually officially a few years ago, we had the I don't know if they're referring by a trademark name to Rural Champion, because we had identified some members. This is predate UK, and we provided awards for members. So we obviously with the in the COVID world, we haven't done the in-person, meetings indeed. Well, this is really the first one that's fully pretty much packed in this room, but the Hill hasn't been really opened up for visits. We haven't had that nice reception on the Hill like we like to do, where we can invite the champions. So we have not by name identified those awardees next year for this year. But they're certainly the members we try to focus on are the people on the key committees. I would say like Senator Wicker, for example, has been very, very helpful on a lot of CDFI issues. He was the lead champion, along with Congressman Guest, on the Revitalizing Small Local Businesses Act. So if I were giving out an award right now and here this year, maybe Senator Wicker might be on that list. Senator Padilla from California was also the one that co-sponsored the legislation on the Senate side, and Representative Carter from New Orleans as well. So there were some nice champions on that new legislation for us. We were talking earlier about Senator Rounds, actually, too. He's the ranking member on the housing subcommittee, along with Tina Smith, and both real champions for rural communities on the housing side, too. Uh-oh, Kate's up. Oh, boy. So the question is, how can some of our regional partners engage? Just show of hands from some of the regional partners. Suzanne Narde, she knows what to do. She can answer this question. She's got, yeah, she can text me anytime. So yeah, the regional partners are, it's, I mean, the same rule of thumb. It's a little harder, when you're a national or regional footprint, to really make those direct connections with the members, but it really is about kind of getting out there in the and showing the work of your success on the ground in those communities. The regional partners as well, please, just reach out to us directly if you have any questions about it. If you're in town, you just need a little help, set up a meeting. We're really happy to do those kind of things.
This is less of a question and more of a comment. Just in case anyone wants one-on-one discussion, Michelle will be here for breakfast tomorrow specifically to talk about what you have on your mind. So if you have something very individualized that you don't want to put in a big room, the policy team will be here for breakfast tomorrow as well at 8 a.m. So just going to plug that.
Well, thank you all. All right.
Great. Thanks so much for that. I absolutely love the policy team. We had a really great session with our FOCs and our rural works partners last night, and there were lots of policy issues that came up. And I said, if you need something fixed, they're definitely the team. So I know I'll probably get in trouble for this, but I'd love the whole LISC policy team to stand up and wave your hands, if you will. I know there's more of you back there. They're an amazing team. Everyone but Mark, who's standing back there, everybody but him is really great. So yeah, right. No, an amazing team. Really, really, they want to hear from you. So please continue to share some of those needs, some of those issues that you want addressed. And they're probably bored in the office. So, you know, if you can just help us keep them busy, that would be great, right? Great. All right. Well, I am so excited to introduce our next speaker. Allison Knox is with Microsoft, and I'm going to share a little bit about Microsoft first because they're one of our favorite philanthropic partners. They've really been an incredible partner as we're trying to discover the best solutions for digital skilling and digital equity. And what I love most about them is that they've really given us this runway to get creative and listen to a lot of you who are in the room today about what the needs are and what some real solutions are that would work. And I think that runway that they've given us to really be creative is what has made this program so successful. And so she's going to share a little bit today about the ways in which they show up in communities and philanthropy and some of those really great tools and resources and programs that they've discovered from partners on the ground like you. And Allison's already made a point that she wants to talk really fast because she really wants to get to questions for you all. So if you have questions about philanthropy and the way that they're showing up in rural communities, please be ready to ask those because she'll be ready to answer them. So I'll do her formal introduction. Allison is the Senior Director of Education Policy at Microsoft Philanthropies and helps address STEM education, rural workforce development, and cybersecurity workforce policy issues at state and federal levels. She's testified before the U.S. House subcommittees on early childhood, elementary, and secondary education during a hearing on how emerging technology affects student privacy, and the U.S. Subcommittee on Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade during a hearing on our nation of builders, training the builders of the future. At the state level, she's testified or engaged in public meetings in many state capitals across the country. She's a true advocate for this work, and we're thrilled to have her here today. Allison.
Great to be here with all of you. I'm going to just plunge right in and then we'll get to questions as soon as possible. Oh, good. That is the slide that I was. So again, I'm here. We're going to talk about exploring the role of philanthropies, especially in workforce development and in rural America. I think one of the things that I thought a lot about, at least in preparing, was just your role out there in the field, trying to make a difference on this really hard, complex issue, and wanted to think more about, like, specifically what could we bring to bear. And there are three basic areas. One, sort of a neutral voice, some data sets that we'll walk through real quickly. I can't even see these slides. There we go. If I take off my glasses, I can. We can obviously be a funder and innovator with all of you, and we are also policy advocates. So let's just talk a little bit about this neutral voice or new data sets. One is for our corporate philanthropies team, it's a little unusual in that we're also joined with LinkedIn. LinkedIn has over 800 million members and over 50 million companies that every single day, all the time, are posting, their job needs, how they're recruiting. I don't know how many of you use it regularly, but because we have this asset, there is something that is generated from it, of course, anonymously, but it's called the economic graph. And all of my slides today, I provide links to the tool or asset or program so that you can check it out in the future. This just gives you a taste in agriculture on the LinkedIn economic graph of the kind of data that they can produce, which is a little bit different than I think what government workforce data systems produce. And you'll see here that it's up to, is it 30%? Yeah. There's a 30% shift in agricultural skills needed out there. Maybe this doesn't surprise you. That's a pretty high number since 2015. And what our infograph actually does real time, if I had my computer and we did this real time, so I can scroll over any of the skills on the 2015 side and skills on the 2021 side. And I can actually break that down into more specific skills. And you can start to see the evolution of what's needed out there. And that's just agriculture. You can also splice and dice this data, not only by the world, but by country, but by state. You can generate these reports really easily and share them at a workforce meeting that you have. And in my mind, as a person who used to do community development for our Michigan cooperative extension system, for a person who worked at a regional chamber of commerce, for a person who used to work at a county and at the state level, all in Michigan, I remember so well that when I sat down to talk about public workforce or workforce in general, you got to start with some data about what employers are doing and need. And so that's why I wanted to start here today. The other thing I remember is, like, sometimes I was loved in my community, and depending on what I was working on, sometimes I really wasn't, because I sometimes felt like I was the bearer of hard news, right? When I was at the Chamber of Commerce, I often had to go to school systems or to a housing unit or wherever and say, everybody needs technology skills, and this is why. And yet people weren't connected to the internet at that point. People didn't have the skills. And sometimes I felt like, geez, it's not about me and my organization. It's really about the data. So sometimes depersonalizing it is helpful. So just like this is from the World Economic Development Forum, but I use the slide sometimes because it immediately lets me say 65% of our kids right now are going to be applying for jobs that we don't even know the title. But that's not coming from me. That's coming from real data. And let's have a different kind of conversation. Here's another data set. I am guessing that all of you are familiar with it. Sorry if the font is small. This is the Department of Labor's data. And every month they're updating all of their data sets. Now, the big green is restaurant and services, and the growth, I think it's like 450% or something like that, which is a little bit, of course, post-COVID, a little bit skewed just because services we're trying to figure it out, I think now. But what's interesting is the next ones are clear of what's needed. Nurse practitioners is number one, 112% growth, right? But then if you drop down, if you can see it, it does say information security analysts. And the next one is data scientists. Again, for someone in tech, corporate philanthropies, this helps make the case for why more digital skills, why more tech back in our communities. And then sometimes, and again, I may be projecting here, I would sometimes say the more people learn, the more you have an opportunity to earn. And sometimes the debate between the 4-year college degree and the 2-year associate's degree, and you just need an associate's degree, and then if you just do a boot camp, you can make $120,000, and then kids would come back to the community. Remember, I was partly rural. I worked with farmers, so it was sometimes challenging when the kids didn't get those jobs and did pay for the boot camps or whatever the case may be, right? And so in this case, it just, again, depersonalizes it, shows the graphs from the Department of Education, Department of Labor. You can speak to it. You can tell a different kind of story. The other data set that I pull from a lot is something that Microsoft does. I think a lot of major companies do it. What they do is they go out to their biggest customers. So we call them our S500 customers. But then we go across and we give them, if they want to respond, to about 300 of them worldwide. And we say, what's going on, in terms of workforce? What are some of your trends? What are you seeing? What do you need? We publish this a lot. I don't think a lot of people in communities access it. And I think back to when I had my jobs, and I think to myself, this would have been just great conversation starters, or for economic roundtables you might have in your communities, or whatever the case may be, to mix things up a bit. In this case, it says 73% of all employees right now want hybrid work experience. Now, whether or not we're all going to have that, that's a trend. That's a That's a really high number. Maybe it doesn't surprise you. That actually I worked here in DC. I'm in their government affairs office. That's a high number to me. Even though our downtown, not as many people are coming in, it's still a conversation starter. What are the expectations of today's, workers? What are they hoping for? And in rural America, I know one huge issue is whether or not students of today can get the skills they need, get a job that they're interested in, and maybe stay in rural America, right? That number should maybe start to shift the way that we design work. And of course, I know it's dependent on the internet, and I know it's depending on digital equity, but I think you guys are fully immersed in those issues. But I just wanted to show you that one as well. Now, this one is a complete lie, but I also know that the public workforce system is sometimes hard to navigate. I don't know how many of you in the room, I wish I could do some polling pre-presentation. How many of you are like nominating people to your public workforce board or supporting them as they vote on things, or maybe you run it? I don't know. But the public WIOA system, it's layered, it's underfunded. I will say that on camera, and it's confusing. And applying for dollars, whether it's in the system or the competitive grants. Now, I won one, a huge one. Probably that's the reason why I ended up at DC. It's still really confusing and challenging and daunting. Ask a philanthropies person, doesn't have to be, of course, me in DC, other people who could have new kinds of probing conversations with our public workforce leaders to get new kinds of answers for all of you when you're doing the important work on the ground. So this is just to show how layered it is, how I'm fully aware that federal, state to local and on up, the vision of it doesn't always pan out, and how people really struggle to navigate it. And then finally, within the section of the presentation in terms of neutral voice and data, there's some really amazing players, I feel, like thought leaders in public workforce or just workforce generally about skills that are needed. And maybe the National Skills Coalition comes and speaks to you every 4 months. I don't know. But this is a group, again, like this is a group that I turn to for guidance and thought and published papers because they're on it. They are also influencing our WIOA system, et cetera. And so it's just a group that if you called up philanthropists or a person in government affairs in this town who share your same interests, they might point you to a group with new information and new guidance that could be helpful. Okay, funder and innovator. My guess is this is kind of how you already know corporate philanthropies, those of us who are showing up in rural America. But let me go through some of our projects with you just so that you get a taste. One is in North Dakota. Anybody here from North Dakota? No, I want to do a cheer for them. Oh, well, maybe they're on camera. Hello, North Dakota. Think of Grand Farm. You could just call it the future of farming, but this is a real place that they're building on 130 acres. And Microsoft Philanthropies leaned in at a very, very early stage and said, there's this kernel of an idea. It's kind of connected to the university. It's part of this other group. There's something to be said about a demonstration site where people can go and not just listen to someone like me from tech say, the cloud is going to disrupt agriculture. And people swear, they'll look out the window looking at the clouds. It's like, I get it. It's kind of a weird concept. Or, by the way, you're going to be measuring data on everything, and it's going to shift the way you do agriculture. Well, this is a demonstration site. This can be replicated in any state. I spent an hour on the phone with these Grand Farm guys. This is not about Microsoft. This is about people in North Dakota coming together to do something different. And I was on the phone with them yesterday and I said, if people are interested in replication or talking to you, are you willing to take the call? And they said, absolutely. This is a new way to experience not just farming. What is the future of work, et cetera? Look at the companies that ended up joining in this effort. This is incubation for new business. This is incubation for new ideas and also talking about new skills that are needed. take a look at the 5 big problems they want to solve. Frankly, I was sort of surprised that the number 4 problem that they want to solve is around workforce development. Maybe you all are not surprised by that, but that's pretty interesting to me that they also have a subcommittee focused deliberately on workforce skills. So it just speaks to start with an economic development conversation. Soon, of course, you're with workforce complexities, but then maybe build a place or maybe imagine a place where people can not just talk about skills, but go see them in action. What does a person who manages a cloud or data sets related to a farm, what does that person do? What does it look like? How do you get the next generation excited about it? That's what I think is so powerful about this model. Another model is sort of what I think a lot of big companies are doing right now, which is we're just allowing a bunch of online content to be published for free for certifications. And we're doing that with LinkedIn. We just announced last Tuesday, 350 new courses that are now online for free for people to get certified. They're great classes. Some are tech-enabled roles, some are strictly tech, and some are foundational skilling. Again, there's a big assumption that non-tech people want to do this technology training online. So I am with you on that. However, this connects directly to your LinkedIn account. So if you already have a profile on LinkedIn and you finish a course, and again, it's free, it goes and populates your profile automatically. I know students in this country who've completed some of the classes and it has been automatically it gets populated on their profile. For whatever reason, that then sends signals to new employers saying they have those skill sets, and they get different kinds of recruiters who are reaching out to them. It's just a little bit faster because it is all online. So one of the things we did with that is we realized that just because you build something, it doesn't mean people want to go and get the training. Frankly, I don't count myself any different than anybody in America, like in terms of how much extra time do I have to take. One of the courses in here that I really want to take is not taking feedback personally. I mean, it's a great, and not that I have super hard time with that, but let's be honest, everybody can get better at it. But like, when do I have the time? What's my incentive for doing it? How does it relate to my day-to-day? These are just real concerns of anybody, right? So what we did is we partnered, or we gave a grant to the North Central Washington Technology Alliance. Anybody here know that group, NCWTA? Great group. And what they did is they took the courses and they said, we need a wraparound program. We need a 1-month program where it's called an upskill-a-thon. And in 1 month's time, put out this competition notice, tell everybody in the community, whoever completes and proves, and they have a whole system, completes and proves that they have completed these courses. Whoever completes the most wins cash prizes. And it worked. This person on the left, his name is Juan. Juan's daughter, so NCWTA created this model during COVID. His daughter came home from college and was at home and learned about the competition. She said to her dad, let's give this a shot. He made the pizzas and put his phone on a pizza pan. Do you see the phone? Together, they completed over 140 courses and won the cash, which was great for them, right? But he talks about how he hadn't imagined himself doing different things with his life until he actually watched and interacted with these courses while he was at work during COVID. Well, when we started to see and hear the stories that came out of this competition, again, it's competition with incentives with cash, we said, we got to try it again. So on the right, we went out and found 8 communities and replicated it. On the right, you see Marion, that's Ohio. This was last week. They just replicated it in their community. And it wasn't there, but in Kansas, one of the students completed over 160 courses, and she shared what she's doing with her. I think she got $2,000. She said, I'm going to do 3 things with this. Thank you. She wrote us a note. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to do this. I learned about it through my CTE program in my high school. This is, I believe she's in Newton, Kansas, rural, really rural. Anybody from Kansas? Darn. Anyway, she said, I'm going to do 3 things with the money. I'm going to pay for my AP test in May. I'm going to save it, pay for that test. I'm going to pay for my ACT test, and I'm going to save it. So when I apply for college, I have the money for the application fee. Okay. Okay. Gave me goosebumps, right? Those are just some of the stories. And I keep thinking to myself, but online learning is out there all the time. Like, why do it's because there's a model, there's a goal, there's incentives. It's a great strategy. It works. And also it sends a signal back to philanthropists saying, oh my gosh, we're impacting people's lives, which is the data that you all want and we want, so that we get more money to do more. Okay, so let's talk about a policy champion. That's also what philanthropies can do, I think, with you. And this is the end. So I really hope that I can fly through this one. And then you guys can just ask me questions. Okay. Another area of workforce development that is booming, and I don't know if you're all talking about in your communities, it's just this idea that we're not safe. There's cyber attacks all the time. And infrastructure, of course, is more and more vulnerable as the attackers become more sophisticated, unfortunately, and how the workforce is so needed in cyber. And so what is the number, 759 or something? Yeah, there's 769,000 openings currently in the cyber field. And right now, Microsoft did, again, we really like data. We analyzed what is going on, for example, with our community colleges. And it turns out that 75% of them do not offer an associate's degree in cyber. And we also know that 57% of them, 57% of the population of the community colleges are female. 49% are Black and African-American or Hispanic, 29% are first-generation college goers, and 20% of them have disabilities. So we also saw that how much their demographic reflected the reality of America. So we said, what if we double down in this area and launched a program, partnerships and program. Oops, what did I do? I didn't do it right. Okay, wait, there we go. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but I'm going to focus on one particular area. So we launched, our president launched October 29th last year, so 2021, a new initiative saying we are going to help skill 250,000 people in the next 5 years in cybersecurity, and we're going to double down and help support community colleges, and we're going to do it through these partners. One is the American Association of Community Colleges, one is the NCYTE Center, which is a best practice center that helps community college get stronger in the space. Last Mile Education Fund, and we're going to release our courses, more of our cyber courses for free. I just wanted to point out the Last Mile Education Center. These are scholarships for students. We pledged to give out 25,000 scholarships to low-income students at any community college who are training to do anything in cyber. And let me tell you, this has been really hard. We have students who are just simply not applying. People who are even, trying cyber or in their IT department. So we've asked them, wait, you kind of knew that you were going to get the scholarship. It can be 500, it could be, depends on the amount that they need. We really want to get this in the hands of students, what's really going on. Students said things like this to us. They said, we never thought we'd win. We thought it would take a year to get the money. And we thought we'd have to write 4 essays. Okay, all of those things are not true. This is a rapid fire scholarship program. Please, 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 if there's nothing else you do with this, my deck, if you get my deck, please go to the Last Mile Education Fund, the Cyber Skills Offer. And if you have an opportunity to give it to your community college leaders, any student who's low income or veterans doing anything on cyber, we want to give them this support. So that's what we did. Woo! And then championing policy. So then in September, Lisa McLean from Michigan, and Representative Yvette Clark from the Brooklyn, New York area in a bipartisan fashion. I'm going to say that again. In a bipartisan fashion, they came together, introduced the Community College Cybersecurity Challenge Act, which is HR 8970. And this is looking at three things. You probably can't see this very well, but the first is making sure that there's more money so that every community college has at least one cyber kind of program. We're not even saying an associate's degree. The second is making sure that there are affordable pathways for students so they can take this incredible growing field so we can grow our workforce in the area. And three, there needs to be more work-based learning experiences for students. There need to be quicker mechanisms for them to be able to get into this field. And this is how the money would flow. It's the proposal's 1.4 billion over 5 years. It really speaks to Microsoft. Well, it's not just Microsoft, tech in general, reaching out, looking at the data. How do we make a difference? Cyber workforce, of course, benefits us, but it benefits the world and the country. How do we offer programs, make commitments, follow through on them? And then finally, how do we support any policy effort that's going in a similar direction? So we are going to be championing this with them. So that's it. Philanthropy, the philanthropies in workforce, exploring that role, the neutral voice, the funder, the innovator, the policy champion. Just to leave you with, Microsoft's mission is to empower every person on the planet to achieve more. And we really do want to become more relevant and supportive of all things rural in America, and just would love to hear your questions. Thanks.
So we definitely are open for questions. So please feel free to come up to the mic if you have a question. I think I'll just start with one that I've heard, and I think we talked a little bit about before, but we have a lot of practitioners in the room right now, a lot of on the ground partners. And so what is it that Microsoft really looks for in a partner? What are some of the things that they should be preparing for to build their organization to look like for someone like Microsoft to invest in them?
Such a good question. I hate to say it, but everything, people who are, when you partner with any group, of course, you all know probably the things that make it successful, right? It's sort of like a marriage almost. It's how do you lock arms? How are you there for each other and you're flexible and responsive? How do you bring both to the, there's one group in Virginia that I helped broker a partnership with, and I was astounded at the number of opportunities he or they would create for us to just simply be in the room when there was a public moment. A lot of times in corporate philanthropies, groups are like, we're having a public moment where, you get your own media hits. So you're kind of over there. And although I understand that, I also am like, it helps us build a case for the next round of funding. Anyway, this group was so incredible in what they did. We ended up helping support a grant writer who ended up getting them more federal funding. So that was sort of a unique experience, but I mean, it's sort of like, I think speaks to any kind of partnership you do that's successful. You just work really hard and you manage the project and you're as kind as possible and you deliver on every single commitment you make. That's, I think, the recipe for success. Oh no, it's 3 PM. I have no questions. I'm going to be really sad. Someone has to ask a question. No, can't be from Rural List. That's cheating. Somebody from the field. Did I totally put you to sleep? I hope not. Oh, great. And you got to tell me where you're from.
Go ahead.
My name is Joseph Caesar. I'm the Executive Director of Legacy Institute for Financial Education. We're in Lufkin, Texas.
Oh.
2 years ago, we were awarded a grant from Microsoft. It was a community skills grant from Microsoft Philanthropies.
Okay.
It was the first grant that we received of its kind. It was a $300,000 3-year grant that was trust-based. It was unrestricted funding. We had objectives that we shared with Microsoft we wanted to accomplish. We obviously accomplished those objectives, but it completely changed our organization from the inside out. I wanted to know if Microsoft continues to make, or is there any plans to continue to make those types of funding available?
It's really interesting. Can you say one more thing about the trust-based? What, how that just, I don't know if everybody knows exactly
So
how that pans out.
trust-based, the way it was described to us is that they're going to leave it to us. They're not going to tell us how to use the funding. Most funding we receive is restricted. So they'll fund a particular program or they'll fund a person. In this case, they said, look, we want you to promote minorities, specifically African-Americans, getting into IT. However way you do that, it's fine with us. If you have other programs that you need to fund, that we're fine with that. Just let us know once or twice a year how you're doing as far as those objectives that you set forth, and we're good.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, so thank you for sharing that. I did not plant that question because that was glowing. I thought, wait, where are we headed? So your question is, how do we do more of that? You're hoping to, are you going to continue? Yeah, there's a real debate in philanthropies. Maybe everybody's aware of it. There's a school of thought around trust-based, which is go find amazing nonprofits out there that do great work and invest in them and say, keep going and doing your great work. It's unrestricted funds. We're not going to have all these reporting requirements. We're not going to sort of start to behave almost like government and in that accountability, in that systematic sort of constant, write the report way. And then there's the other school of thought that's like, oh my gosh, we really got to drive impact. How are we going to quantify it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it just depends on leadership, I think, in terms of the style or the approach. I do think there's power to this unrestricted funding. And I think especially during COVID, when people were losing their jobs in the nonprofit sector, I think it was really critical. I do think we're continuing with some of that. I think we're trying to innovate, really trying to figure out what generates impact. We're really trying to figure out, this is a really tough one. I'm guessing you all share it. It's not the training, it's not the skills conversation only, and it's not the data. How do we measure getting people into real jobs? And if people can come together and help us crack that nut, I think we'll be right there. Another question, please. Thank you. Come on, another one. Should I call on someone?
Oh, I got you a question.
No, but you're rural list.
But I'm not asking a real life question. I'm representing the virtual community.
Oh, great. Sorry. I'm in trouble. Wait, what? So where are they from?
They didn't say. They just had there have been a lot of they've been really reacting to the cybersecurity training, specifically about training for workforce. But some of the people in the room and the person online was really concerned about training small businesses to protect, because it is also a very common thing for smaller businesses to fall, and it can destroy a community. I'm elaborating, I'm sorry. So they wanted you to talk a little bit more about cybersecurity training specifically for small businesses, and maybe some examples that people could take advantage of.
Yeah. The good news for the small business person is that some of the certifications that are really high quality and great, they don't actually cost that much to engage in. So if you have even 3 people on your team, remember I worked for a chamber of commerce, so I know small businesses and how small they can actually be. And so if there's somebody on your team who's doing all things tech, allowing them to carve out some time to go get the training and the certification, whatever kind that is best for that small business, it's pretty available. I think that's the good news. What's tough is just that tech person, I feel like is getting burned out, just overwhelmed. And so we need to do more to, I think, link the students in the community college or even in the high schools who are raising their hand and already interested in this space. How do we link them directly to the small businesses so that the students get the work-based learning experience, paid or not, that are trustworthy? I've had some small business in Wyoming say to me, hey, you're a nice person, they said to me, but remember, those same students can be hackers. So how do we know we can trust them? And so we said, okay, we need to get serious about that too. There needs to be some screening there. How can we help you with the screening? But be that as it may, ask those students to come into your small business, because the students become so much more employable if they have those work-based learning experiences. So I think connecting locally is really important. I know you had a question. Is it Matt? Did you want to ask a question? I didn't mean to shut it down.
Yeah, I was about to leave out a protest and then you saw me. So yeah, it was, and I'm glad others had a chance to go first because it's a little adjacent, but I was curious what you guys are doing in the digital inclusion space.
Mhm.
Because we talked about a lot of the federal funding now that's available through this legislation. So I didn't know if you all were also playing a role, or maybe that's on the foundation side.
So when I was preparing for this, I asked if you guys wanted to talk about those tools. And because you guys had covered so much this morning, we thought it would be good to just shift into these other areas. But we're really involved. We have an entire, we call them airband team, and we look at help deploy telecom in the country, but partner with smaller ISP providers. So there's that. But then also we're really working with groups like National Digital Inclusion Alliance, the National Skills Coalition, the National Government Association, to bring up how the digital equity planning funding, right, where it's driving that equity conversation. How do we all work to ensure that it influences the massive BEAD funding? And so what we're trying to do is provide tools that help diagnose the inequities quicker. So we have a digital equity dashboard, which is free, and it takes like 9 data sets, and you can visually, and I'm always happy to do or I can get the team to do a webinar on this, but quickly analyze by census tract where the connectivity is, or, what kind of education level the groups have, so that you can like diagnose it quicker, so that can help get your plan more robust for the state as you're applying for these funds. So we're doing activities like that. And then we're also supporting with digital equity playbooks, because we know that there's so many groups out there that are really needing support in terms of templates and how to write and do these. But I've been on the phone with probably, I don't know, maybe 26 different state new broadband people. I mean, it depends on the state. Some groups are like, we just got here last week. So, but talking to them about some of their pain points and trying to provide tools that will be helpful. So happy to lean in there if rural LISC is interested.
Not to shame the room, but online is asking a lot of questions. One person would like you to repeat the stat about how many youth are preparing for jobs we don't know about yet.
65%. That was the World Economic Forum report. There's probably other data sets, but I thought, why not put something international up there, because then it shows that everybody's talking about it. And oh, by the way, some countries are really designing their education systems much differently because of stats like that. So the international competition thing can come into play when you're talking with folks.
Thank you. And second, another question is, how do we find those philanthropies that subscribe to the unrestricted trust-based school of thought in Ohio?
That's probably a really good small business right there, right? I don't know the answer to that question. I think if it were me, I would probably go to the Council of Community Foundations and sort of see if there's anyone out there sort of tracking that, or the philanthropic big organizations. But I'm happy to come back to your rural LISC leaders with some thoughts on that. But I completely understand how critical that is.
We are documenting this, so we now we'll have to follow up with this. Another question is, Allison described research that's not typical manufacturing focused. What has been your experience breaking through with economic development directors, schools, to think long-term and think about the person's quality of life and job career satisfaction?
So what was the first part about manufacturing?
You've been talking about research that's not typically manufacturing focused, which is a lot of workforce development.
Right. Yeah, I mean, again, having come from Michigan, we used to talk about manufacturing and advanced manufacturing all the time. There are amazing data sets dissecting what those needs are. For me, it seems like the continual rub, there's a few. One is, erasing or shifting in people's minds and communities what manufacturing means now. I think with the movement of electric cars and, data being part of like green buildings, everything's being managed through technology, you can continue to have that drumbeat that it's not people, just working on the lines. That still, I don't think that shift has actually shifted. But working within the manufacturing workforce development sort of surge, I think it really does make the case that no matter what job you get in the future, it is in essence kind of a tech job. And so you can make that case by looking at manufacturing. And one of the things that I really liked doing was just getting out there and having groups of people tour a manufacturing plant. If we're going to talk about manufacturing, let's go see. In our case, it was moldings for plastic containers, like, the Tide. I remember it was the orange Tide one that they had the moldings, and they took us from A to Z. It was a plant that I drove by all the time. I had never stopped in, and we took, like 40 students in. By the end of it, they're like, I had no idea, and they were excited. And a couple of them ended up thinking about a youth apprenticeship. So that was pretty exciting. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. Yay.
Hi, my name's Nicole. I work with Fahi out of Berea, Kentucky.
Wait, sorry, you work for what?
It's called Fahi.
Fahi, okay.
Yeah. And
I have been to Kentucky many times.
there you go.
And Texas. I think credibility is important, right? Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Well, you're welcome back anytime. The scholarship you mentioned about cyber is really exciting. Is there any plans or thoughts to broaden that past cyber in the future or other types of career paths, working specifically in the trades and construction industry, right? Thinking about how that's promoted to young people in particular. And so just didn't know if that was planned.
Okay, first off, thank you for your question. I can get pretty revved up about everything scholarships for students because, oh my gosh, there are kids out there who are dropping out of school because they can't pay their internet bill. There are students out there who are not finishing a certification. Why? Because they can't, pay the babysitter. Like some of these emergency grants that are smaller, like they need to be there to get the students over these what might seem like smaller barriers, but end up being gigantic. So yes, if you go to the Last Mile Education group, the woman who runs it, her name is Ruth Farmer. She would not mind if I said her name out loud. We were just emailing today. She's amazing. She is ready to widen the scope to every field. But what has been, when we launched it in cyber and community college students and veterans, we thought it would be, the opposite of what happened, which is we thought they wouldn't be able to manage the requests. We have people on the phone calling the schools, and there's always ethics involved. You can't push certain things to certain, professors to make students do X. You have to do this in a sensitive way. If you call it an emergency fund and you go toward one student, are you basically saying we know that you're, there's sensitivities here. So getting the word out is really tough. And then convincing the students that this is going to be kind of quick and the money's going to get in your account quicker has just been challenging. But yes, the number of industries will be widening. We need more funders, which I think are going to happen because we all want people to complete things, but then we also need help making sure the students apply. I promised that I was going to focus more on questions than talking at people. See, I fulfilled my promise. Anybody else? Anybody from Michigan? Geez. No? Okay, go ahead.
From Indiana, it's close.
Where you're from?
Indianapolis.
Indianapolis.
So
Okay. Go IU.
I lead LISC's economic development team. My name is Bill, and thanks for speaking.
Okay.
We are constantly looking for places where innovation is coming out of partnerships between WIOA-funded workforce boards and local economic development, and it's challenging to find great examples of that. Where do you find good examples of those partnerships? I'm going to ask you a question back. Do you think that some of the applications that have come in to the federal government around Build Back Better has anybody Yeah, I haven't looked deeply into those. They obviously went a regional approach with community colleges as kind of the core of that. I just think sort of the everyday work of WIOA funded activity is there's just not a lot of great innovation being pushed out. But I'm curious if you've seen any place where it is coming out that could be amplified through this group and through LISC's work.
In terms of systems, I would have to think about the answer to that, but I can tell you about one specific project that I thought was really helpful and innovative, especially because it was actually employer driven, which is what I think all of us know, that when you try to bring these groups together, you're trying to always make the case that everything's employer driven. And then often you ask yourself the question, wait, did the employers really drive it? You know, so in this case, it was that as digitization has been hitting small business really hard, especially post-COVID. I mean, just during COVID, if they wanted to keep their business going, and post-COVID, when people aren't, let's say, going to the different kinds of restaurants, et cetera, and the digitization is coming to these businesses, how do we help the small businesses actually create the systems to keep their business not just doing well, but doing better, right? And so what this one innovation was the workforce system. And I don't know if the economic developers in the town also did it too, but they decided to no longer expect people to come to them, but that they were going to go remote. So they all got laptops and they all divvied up per person on the staff, number of small businesses, and they got trained of how to build a website, build a back end with databases, order forms, et cetera, you know, depending on the industry. And then they spent the time with the small business for as long as it took until that small business felt like they knew what this digitization process was. I found that to be pretty inspiring. Yeah, so that was one. I would love to come back with more, because I think that's a really tough question. And there's so many proposals that have come into the federal government with all these federal dollars that sometimes I just want to have a huge notebook and just read them all, just to see, even though they don't get funded, like what's new and different. And, you know, I think that's a great question, and we should do some analysis there. Thanks. Have a great rest of the conference.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. Wait. Oh, well, don't forget your purse then. You can go that way. I'll let you go that way. Thank you so much. That was so incredible. I love the Q&A. Love that you all came up and asked questions too. So thank you for that. Our next step is a break. However, I can feel our director of digital equity squirming in her seat in North Carolina, all the way from here, or all the way here. And so if Julianne, if you don't mind, can you get back to the digital equity slide for me? So really briefly, thanks to Microsoft, I did want to point out the fact that there are a number of digital equity partners that are probably in the room. If you're a digital navigator, can you raise your hand, or look at all these digital navigator sites? So these are our digital navigator sites that in part were really funded by one of the many grants that Microsoft gives out. This was the result of Microsoft really helping to launch this digital equity network for rural. We have over 55 organizations funded across 21 states. Over 2,000 individuals, families have been trained in digital equity or connected through digital connectors. And what my favorite stat is there are almost 8,000 families, LMI families, who have been connected to low cost internet. So there's tons and tons of work going on in that space. And it's really exciting to know that a lot of you all are in the room, and Microsoft had a really big hand in that. So give yourselves a round of applause for all that great work. And then one more quick thing, if you're a financial opportunity center, can you raise your hand really quickly? So here are financial opportunity centers across the country that are providing financial and employment coaching in an integrated way. And then if you're a rural works cohort or a rural works partner of some sort. And what I love about this exercise is what you'll see here are there are a lot of hands that went up multiple times. And that's really what we're trying to do at Rural LISC. You'll hear a lot more about that after the break by our FOC Life in Lufkin, Texas. They've really done an excellent job at integrating those services, layering those services to really provide some of these solutions to the community that are coming up. So I'll let you go on your break. And then when we come back, we'll hear from Joe and Santa.